The sound that woke me that morning didn't belong in a quiet place like Pine Hollow. It was the grinding roar of a diesel engine. Heavy, loud, mechanical. I stepped out onto my porch before the sun had even climbed over the hills, pulling my jacket tighter against the cold morning air. Gravel crunched under my boots as I looked down my driveway, and that's when I saw it. A massive flatbed tow truck was already halfway backed in beside my barn. The steel ramp screeched as it lowered toward the ground, pointing straight at my old pickup truck that sat parked beside the fence where it had been for months. The driver stood near the controls, glancing nervously between the truck and the woman standing across the road. Lydia Hastings, HOA president. She stood there like she owned the whole valley, arms folded tightly across her navy blazer, a clipboard tucked against her chest. Her chin was raised slightly, the same smug expression she wore at every HOA meeting. "This vehicle has been reported abandoned," she announced loudly enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "It violates community regulations and must be removed immediately." I walked down the steps slowly, staring at her in disbelief. "Abandoned?" I said. "That truck runs fine." "It's registered and insured." Lydia flipped through a stack of printed papers like a lawyer presenting evidence in court. "You were notified weeks ago, Mr. Kaz." "Mercer," she replied coldly. "Multiple violations." By then, porch lights were flicking on up and down the street. Doors opened. Neighbors stepped outside in robes and hoodies, drawn by the noise. Phones began appearing in hands as people realized something dramatic was happening. The tow driver circled my pickup slowly, inspecting it. He crouched near the front bumper and wiped dust from the VIN plate with his glove. Then he stood up and looked over at Lydia. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "who authorized this tow?" Lydia barely looked at him. "The Pine Hollow Estates HOA," she said confidently. "You have the paperwork." The driver stared at the truck again, then at my barn, then at the fence line. Something about the situation clearly wasn't sitting right with him. He walked a few steps away, pulled out his phone, and made a short call. I couldn't hear the full conversation. Just a few quiet words. A pause. Then the driver's posture changed completely. He lowered the phone slowly, walked back toward the truck, and shut off the tow controls. "I'm not hooking this vehicle," he said flatly. For the first time that morning, Lydia's confident smile disappeared. Because she had no idea whose property she was actually standing on. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Fenceline File Stories. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? 2 years earlier, none of this felt like a fight waiting to happen. When I first arrived in Pine Hollow, the place felt quiet, almost peaceful in a way that's getting harder and harder to find. My name is Daniel Mercer, and after spending most of my life running heavy equipment on construction sites across 3 states, I inherited something I never expected: my grandfather's old farmland. The land sat on the rural edge of Pine Hollow Estates, a neat suburban development that had slowly grown outward over the years until it almost surrounded the property. My grandfather's land had been there long before the subdivision existed. A wide stretch of pasture, a weathered red barn, and a gravel driveway that curved down from the road toward the fields. Technically, the farm wasn't part of the HOA at all. But when the neighborhood expanded, it ended up sitting right beside it like the last stubborn piece of countryside refusing to disappear. When I moved in, life was simple. My days were spent repairing equipment in the small workshop barn, clearing fence lines, and maintaining the property my grandfather had worked for decades. The old pickup truck that everyone seemed so interested in later was just part of that life. It wasn't pretty, but it ran perfectly, and it had hauled more lumber, fencing, and feed across that land than I could count. From my porch, you could see neat suburban houses lining the ridge across the road, perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, and freshly painted fences. At first, the people seemed friendly enough. Neighbors waved when they drove by. A couple of them even stopped to introduce themselves when they saw me fixing up the barn. That's also when I first heard the name, Lydia Hastings. "She runs the HOA," one neighbor told me quietly while leaning against the fence one afternoon. "Just try not to get on her radar." At the time, I didn't think much of it. A homeowners association didn't really mean anything to me. My land wasn't inside their boundary lines, and I figured that was the end of the story. For the first few weeks, things were calm. Then the email started. The first one was polite enough. Lydia introduced herself as the president of the Pine Hollow Estates Homeowners Association. She welcomed me to the area and mentioned that several residents had concerns about the appearance of the property near the entrance road. Specifically, she mentioned my tractor being visible from the street. I read the email twice, slightly confused. The tractor had been parked beside the barn since the 1980s. Still, I responded politely. I told her the property wasn't part of the HOA, but assured her I kept things clean and maintained. Her reply came back the next morning. Short, professional, but slightly colder. Over the next few months, the emails kept coming. Another message mentioned dust from my gravel driveway blowing toward nearby houses on windy days. Another one asked whether I had plans to remove outdated farm equipment that may negatively impact neighborhood aesthetics. That was the exact phrase she used, neighborhood aesthetics. Each message was written like a polite suggestion, but something about them felt different. There was a tone underneath the words, like someone slowly testing how far their authority reached. At first, I tried to stay cooperative. I moved a couple of tools out of sight near the barn. I watered the driveway during dry weeks to keep the dust down. I even trimmed the fence line along the road so it looked cleaner. But the more I cooperated, the more the requests seemed to grow. One evening while I was repairing a fence post, an older neighbor named Carl stopped his truck beside the road and leaned out the window. "Lydia been sending you emails yet?" he asked. I laughed and told him about the tractor complaint. Carl didn't laugh back. "She likes control," he said quietly. "And sometimes she forgets where that control ends." That comment stuck with me longer than I expected. Then one afternoon, about 6 months after I moved in, I came home to find an envelope hanging from the metal gate at the entrance of my driveway. Inside was an official-looking notice printed with the Pine Hollow Estates HOA letterhead. According to the document, my pickup truck was violating HOA parking regulations. The notice claimed the vehicle had been left abandoned and visible from community roads. I stood there for a long moment reading the page again. Then I looked toward the barn where the truck was parked, exactly where it always had been, on land that didn't belong to the HOA. That was the first moment I realized something strange was starting. And it wouldn't stop with a simple warning letter. The first letter about the truck might have been easy to ignore. But Lydia Hastings didn't stop at one. Within a week, another envelope appeared on my gate, this time thicker, stamped with bold red lettering that read, "Notice of Violation." The language inside was colder than before. According to the document, my pickup truck was now officially classified as an abandoned vehicle negatively impacting community property values. I stood there in the gravel driveway holding the paper while the truck itself sat 20 feet away beside the barn. The engine worked. The registration sticker was current. The tires were fine. Nothing about it was abandoned. Still, I decided to handle it calmly. I called the number listed on the notice and left Lydia a message explaining the situation clearly. "My property isn't part of the HOA," I said. "The truck is parked on private farmland outside the subdivision boundary." Her response arrived by email the next morning. Short, sharp, certain. According to her interpretation of the HOA bylaws, any vehicle visible from a community road could be subject to enforcement action if it damaged neighborhood appearance. In other words, if someone inside the HOA could see it, she believed she had the right to regulate it. I read the message twice, trying to decide if it was a misunderstanding. Then another letter arrived, and another. Each one added a new fine: $50, $100, $200. By the third notice, the letters had stopped sounding polite altogether. The wording felt more like legal threats than neighborhood communication. That's when I decided it was time to deal with this face-to-face. The Pine Hollow HOA held monthly meetings at the community clubhouse just inside the subdivision entrance. The building sat on a perfectly trimmed lawn with decorative lights along the walkway and a row of identical SUVs parked outside. I walked in wearing work boots and a flannel shirt, feeling slightly out of place among the pressed polo shirts and neat suburban outfits. About 30 residents sat in folding chairs facing a long table where the HOA board members were arranged like a small city council. Lydia sat in the center. Her navy blazer was perfectly pressed. A stack of documents sat neatly arranged in front of her. When the meeting reached the section labeled Property Concerns, she looked directly at me. Misdirectly at me. "Mercer," she said, her voice amplified slightly through the room's microphone system. "Thank you for attending tonight." Something about the way she said it made a few people in the audience glance at each other. Then the lights dimmed slightly. Behind her, a projector screen flickered on. And suddenly my pickup truck appeared on the wall. A large photograph filled the screen, taken from across the road. Then another, and another. Each image showed the same thing, my truck parked beside the barn, exactly where it had always been. "This vehicle," Lydia announced, pointing to the screen with a pen, "has remained unmoved for extended periods of time and is visible from the community entrance road." I felt heat rising in my chest. "It's parked on my land," I said from the audience, "which isn't part of the HOA. She nodded politely, the same way someone nods at a child who doesn't understand something. "Regardless of technical boundaries," she replied smoothly, "its visibility directly affects the appearance of Pine Hollow Estates." A few people shifted in their chairs. I noticed a couple of neighbors looking down instead of at the screen. One man leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered something quietly. She nodded. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone was familiar. Not surprise. Recognition. Like they'd seen this before. I stood up. "My property line ends before your subdivision even starts," I said. "You don't have jurisdiction over my driveway or my barn." For a brief moment, the room was silent. Then Lydia simply tapped the stack of violation notices on the table. "We disagree." Her tone stayed calm, but her eyes were hard. The meeting moved on to the next agenda item like nothing unusual had happened. I walked out of the clubhouse that night realizing something had shifted. This wasn't about a truck anymore. It had become a challenge. And Lydia Hastings didn't like losing challenges. 2 days later, another envelope appeared on my gate. This one was thicker than the rest. Inside was a formal notice stamped with the HOA letterhead and signed by Lydia herself. The message was simple. Failure to remove the abandoned vehicle within 48 hours would result in enforcement action by the Pine Hollow Estates Homeowners Association. The final line was printed in bold. If the vehicle remained after the deadline, the HOA would authorize a towing company to remove it at the owner's expense. I read the notice once. Then again. The truck sat beside the barn exactly where it always had, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I realized Lydia Hastings might actually try to follow through. After the meeting at the clubhouse, things didn't calm down. They got worse. Within a week, another violation notice appeared on my gate, then another the following Monday. Soon it became a routine. Every few days I'd drive down the gravel driveway and find a fresh envelope clipped to the metal latch like some kind of unwanted delivery. The accusations kept changing. First the truck was abandoned property, then Lydia claimed it was leaking oil onto the ground. The notice included a photograph she had taken from the road, zoomed in on the dirt beneath the truck. According to the letter, the supposed oil stain was an environmental concern affecting nearby residential properties. I walked out to the truck after reading that one and crouched down beside it. The ground beneath the engine was dry as dust. Still, another fine was added to the total. A week later, the complaint changed again. This time, Lydia accused me of operating an unlicensed mechanical repair business from the barn. She included photos of tools visible through the open doors and claimed that several residents had reported commercial activity. I stood in the doorway of the barn reading the notice while the afternoon sun poured across the workbench. The only commercial activity happening in there was me fixing my own tractor. But that didn't seem to matter. The letters kept coming. One even included pictures of the barn itself. According to Lydia, the structure violated HOA design guidelines because its weathered red paint didn't match the architectural harmony of Pine Hollow Estates. That one actually made me laugh. The barn had been standing there since the 1970s. The subdivision had been built less than 15 years earlier, but somehow the building that existed first was now the problem. By then, the stack of violation notices sitting on my kitchen table was getting thick. One afternoon, while I was repairing a fence post near the road, a black SUV slowed beside the gate. The driver's window rolled down, and Mrs. Green, who lived 2 houses inside the subdivision, leaned out slightly. She glanced back toward the neighborhood before speaking. "Be careful," she said quietly. "About what?" I asked. She lowered her voice even more. "Lydia's been talking about your land." That caught my attention immediately. "What about it?" "Mrs. Prowers." Green hesitated. Then she said something that made the whole situation suddenly make more sense. "The HOA wants to expand the subdivision boundary next year," she explained. "There's been talk about adding a walking trail and a small park area." She nodded toward my pasture. "Your property sits right in the middle of where they want it." For a moment, I didn't say anything. The pasture stretched wide and green behind the barn, bordered by old wooden fencing my grandfather had built decades earlier. "Are you saying she's trying to push me out?" I asked. "Mrs. Astis." Green didn't answer directly, but the look on her face said enough. "The truck complaints," she added carefully, "might just be pressure." She drove away a minute later, leaving me standing there beside the fence post with a wrench in my hand. That evening, I walked down to the barn and stared at the pickup for a long time. Suddenly, the endless violation letters made a lot more sense. The truck wasn't the real issue. The land was. 2 days later, another neighbor confirmed it. Carl stopped by while I was stacking lumber near the barn and leaned against the tailgate of the truck. "You hear about the HOA development plan?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He sighed. "Lydia's already been telling people the farmland will eventually become part of Pine Hollow." That was the moment the whole thing shifted in my mind. If Lydia believed she could pressure me into selling or forcing some kind of legal claim over the property, then the violation campaign was only the beginning. And if she was willing to bend rules already, there was no telling how far she might push it. That night, I started preparing. I mounted security cameras along the barn roofline facing the driveway. Another camera went near the gate where the violation notices kept appearing. Then I drove into town and pulled copies of the official county property maps. The boundary lines were clear. My land stopped exactly where the subdivision began. The HOA had zero authority over anything beyond that fence. Still, something told me Lydia Hastings wasn't the kind of person who cared much about lines on a map. A few evenings later, just as the sun was setting behind the hills, Carl called me. His voice sounded tense. "You might want to keep an eye on that truck tonight," he said. "Why?" I asked. "I saw Lydia meeting with a towing company driver at the subdivision entrance this afternoon. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach." "You're sure?" "Pretty sure," he said. "And the way she was pointing toward your place, it didn't look friendly." I walked outside after the call ended and stood in the quiet yard. The barn lights glowed softly against the darkening sky. The pickup sat beside the fence exactly where it always had. If Lydia really planned to send a tow truck onto land she didn't control, she was crossing a line far bigger than HOA paperwork. But before I had time to prepare anything further, the sound of a diesel engine echoed up the road. Heavy, loud, mechanical. And before sunrise the next morning, that tow truck rolled straight into my driveway. That evening after Carl's warning, I didn't sleep much. The more I thought about Lydia Hastings and the sudden flood of violation notices, the more the situation stopped feeling like a simple HOA dispute. It felt planned, calculated. So the next morning I did something I probably should have done weeks earlier. I called my cousin Aaron Mercer. Aaron and I grew up together, but our lives took very different paths. While I spent most of my adult life running bulldozers and excavators across construction sites, Aaron went to law school. These days he worked as a county zoning attorney about 40 miles away. If anyone understood property boundaries and land regulations better than the HOA board, it was him. He drove out to the farm that afternoon in a gray sedan covered in courthouse dust. Aaron stepped out wearing a wrinkled suit jacket and carrying a leather folder thick with paperwork. He looked around the property slowly before even saying hello. "Nice place," he said, glancing toward the barn in the open pasture. Hard to believe someone's trying to start a war over a pickup truck. I handed him the stack of violation notices Lydia had been sending. Aaron flipped through the pages while leaning against the tailgate of the truck itself. Every few seconds he made a quiet sound under his breath. "Wow," he muttered after a minute. "What?" I asked. "These fines are ridiculous." He finished reading the letters and then walked toward the road where the property line met the subdivision entrance. For several minutes, he studied the ground, the fence posts, and the county marker embedded in the dirt near the ditch. Then he returned to the truck and opened his folder. Inside were printed maps and official county documents. "I pulled the property records before I came," he explained. "Wanted to see exactly what Lydia thinks she's enforcing." He spread the maps across the hood of the truck. The diagrams showed the subdivision boundary in clean black lines. And my property sitting beside it, not inside it. Beside it. Aaron tapped the map with his finger. "This right here," he said. "What? Your grandfather registered this land under an agricultural easement back in the 1980s. I frowned slightly. "I know it's farmland." Aaron shook his head. "No, it's more than that." He turned the map slightly and pointed to a paragraph of small legal text near the corner. "This easement legally protects the property for agricultural use," he explained, "which means residential organizations like HOAs can't extend jurisdiction over it." "So, Lydia has no authority here?" I asked. Aaron gave a short laugh. "None. Not even close." He then walked over to the pickup truck and knocked lightly on the hood. "And here's the part she definitely doesn't understand." I raised an eyebrow. "This truck," Aaron continued, "is considered agricultural equipment under county code." I blinked. "A pickup truck? On farmland being used for agricultural work?" he replied. "Yes." He pointed back to the paperwork. "Which means if someone removes it from this property without permission, it's not just towing." "What is it then?" Aaron looked up at me with a small grin. "It's illegal seizure of agricultural equipment." For a moment, the weight of that sentence hung in the quiet air between us. Across the road, Pine Hollow Estates looked calm and perfectly organized like always. Neatly trimmed lawns, matching mailboxes, children riding bicycles down the sidewalks. But suddenly, the entire situation had flipped. If Lydia actually followed through with her threat and sent a tow truck onto my property, she wouldn't just be bending HOA rules, she'd be breaking county law. Aaron began gathering the papers back into his folder. "So what should I do?" I asked. He thought for a moment. Then he smiled. "Nothing. Nothing." "Exactly," he said. "Let her make the mistake." Aaron explained that if Lydia ordered a tow truck without verifying the jurisdiction first, she could face serious legal trouble. At minimum, the HOA could be liable for unlawful property interference. At worst, there could be criminal charges. But only if she actually tries it, he said. So, we wait. That night, I installed 2 more cameras along the barn roofline facing the driveway. Not because I expected anything dramatic, but because if Lydia Hastings was as determined as she seemed, there was a good chance she would eventually push too far. Days passed, then weeks. The violation letters kept coming. The fines kept increasing. Each notice sounded more confident than the last. Finally, one afternoon, a new letter appeared on my gate. This one was printed on thick white paper with bold black lettering. Final enforcement notice. The message was simple. If the vehicle remained on the property after 48 hours, the Pine Hollow Estates HOA would authorize immediate towing and removal. I folded the letter slowly. Then I walked down the driveway and stood beside the truck. The engine ticked quietly as the metal cooled in the afternoon sun. Everything was quiet, peaceful, just like it had been when I first moved here. But now I understood exactly what was about to happen. Aaron had been right. If Lydia believed she had the authority to enforce her rules here, she would eventually act on it. So I did exactly what he suggested. I waited. And sure enough, she did. After my conversation with Aaron, everything about the situation felt different. Before that day, I had been reacting to Lydia's letters and threats, trying to reason with someone who clearly had no interest in listening. But now I understood something important. She didn't know the law, and she was about to make a mistake that could expose everything. So instead of arguing with her again, I stopped responding entirely. I focused on preparing. The first thing I did was finish installing the security cameras. 2 were mounted high along the barn roofline facing the driveway, giving a clear view of the truck and anyone who approached it. Another camera pointed toward the gate at the road, the same place where Lydia's violation notices kept appearing. The system recorded continuously and backed everything up online. If someone stepped onto my property or tried to touch the truck, there would be no confusion about what happened. Next, I gathered the paperwork. Aaron had already given me copies of the official county property maps and the agricultural easement records. I printed multiple sets and placed them in folders inside the house and inside the barn workshop. One copy even sat on the dashboard of the pickup itself. Not as a warning, just in case someone needed to see it. Aaron handled the other part of the preparation. A few days after he visited the farm, he called me late in the evening. I spoke with someone at county enforcement, he said. About Lydia? About the property lines, he clarified. And about what might happen if someone attempts to tow agricultural equipment from protected farmland. I leaned back in the chair at the kitchen table. What did they say? They're interested, Aaron replied calmly. But they can't step in unless something actually happens. In other words, Lydia would have to make the first move. Aaron had asked the county officer he knew, Deputy Marcus Hale, to remain on standby if things escalated. Nothing official, just someone aware of the situation. If a tow truck showed up where it didn't belong, the right person would already know where to look. The strategy was simple. Do nothing. Let Lydia create her own problem. Meanwhile, her campaign inside the neighborhood grew louder. I started hearing about it from neighbors who quietly stopped by the farm or mentioned things when they passed along the road. According to Carl, Lydia had begun discussing the truck situation during HOA meetings. She's telling everyone you're refusing to follow the rules, he said one afternoon while leaning against the fence. What rules? I asked. Carl shrugged. Her rules. Apparently, Lydia had been showing new photos of the truck during meetings and presenting them as evidence of someone disrespecting the community standards. She claimed she had issued multiple warnings. She told residents she had tried to resolve the situation peacefully, and she insisted the problem would soon be fixed. Within days, several neighbors mentioned seeing emails Lydia had sent to the entire HOA mailing list. The message described my truck as an abandoned vehicle visible from the main entrance road. According to the email, the HOA board had voted to take enforcement action, and the problem would be resolved within days. The wording was confident, almost celebratory. It sounded less like a warning and more like an announcement of an upcoming victory. Carl showed me the email on his phone one evening. Lydia had written that maintaining the appearance of Pine Hollow Estates required firm leadership and decisive action. She promised the community that the situation would soon be corrected. Standing there beside the barn, I could almost picture the way she must have written it. Her chin raised slightly, certain she was in control, certain the outcome was already decided. But the truth was, the outcome depended entirely on one decision she hadn't made yet: whether or not she would actually send someone onto my property. Over the next few days, the subdivision grew strangely quiet. No new violation letters appeared on my gate. No emails arrived in my inbox. The silence felt deliberate, like something was being prepared. Then on the 4th evening after Lydia's email, Carl called again. His voice carried the same uneasy tone as before. You still got those cameras running? He asked. Every day, I said. Good, he replied. I waited. Carl hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I saw Lydia at the subdivision entrance this afternoon, he said. She was talking with a driver from a towing company. My eyes moved automatically toward the pickup truck sitting beside the barn. And? I asked. She was pointing down the road, Carl continued, right toward your driveway. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The sky was turning dark outside the kitchen window, and the barn lights had already switched on automatically. Well, Carl finally said quietly, looks like she's planning to make good on that promise. After the call ended, I stepped outside into the cool evening air. The farm was silent except for the distant sound of crickets. The truck sat exactly where it always had. The cameras were recording. The documents were ready. Aaron had warned the right people. Everything was in place. Now all that remained was one final step. Lydia Hastings had to decide she was powerful enough to take my truck. And the next morning, just before sunrise, she did exactly that. By the time the tow truck finished backing into my driveway, the quiet morning had already turned into a neighborhood spectacle. The engine rumbled heavily as the driver stepped down from the cab and walked toward my pickup. The steel ramp behind the truck had already begun lowering, the metal grinding against itself in the cold air. Across the road, Lydia Hastings stood like a woman waiting for a performance to begin. Her arms were folded tightly across her blazer, clipboard tucked against her side, her posture stiff with confidence. She watched everything with the same satisfied look she had worn during the HOA meeting weeks earlier, except now this wasn't a projector screen. This was my driveway, and my truck. A few more porch lights flicked on down the street. Doors opened slowly as neighbors stepped outside in jackets and slippers, drawn by the noise of the diesel engine and the growing tension in the air. Phones appeared in hands. People were recording. Lydia seemed to notice the attention and leaned into it. "Go ahead and remove the vehicle," she called toward the driver, her voice carrying clearly across the road. The tow operator didn't move immediately. Instead, he walked slowly around the pickup truck, studying it carefully. He crouched beside the front tire, then leaned down near the bumper and wiped dust from the VIN plate with his glove. The entire time Lydia stood there watching, clearly expecting the process to begin any second. But the driver didn't start hooking the chains. He kept examining the truck. Then he stood up and looked toward the barn. His eyes moved slowly across the fence line. The pasture, the property markers near the road. Something about the scene clearly wasn't sitting right with him. He turned toward Lydia. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "who authorized this tow?" Lydia didn't hesitate. "The Pine Hollow Estates Homeowners Association," she replied confidently, lifting the clipboard slightly. "You were contacted by our office yesterday." The driver nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "But I mean who owns the property where the vehicle is sitting." For the first time, Lydia's expression flickered slightly. "This entire area falls under HOA Enforcement Authority," she replied sharply. "The vehicle has been declared abandoned." A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably where they stood. Carl had appeared beside the road near the gate, arms crossed as he watched the exchange. The driver looked back at the truck again. Then he looked at the fence post near the road where the county marker sat half buried in the dirt. His hesitation grew more obvious. "I just need to verify something," he said finally. Without waiting for Lydia to respond, he stepped away and pulled a phone from his jacket pocket. The neighborhood fell strangely quiet. Even the diesel engine seemed to idle more softly as the driver walked a few yards down the driveway and made a call. From where I stood near the porch, I couldn't hear the entire conversation. Only pieces. "Yeah, I'm at the location now." Pause. "Pickup truck on a farm property." Another pause. Then the driver looked up toward the subdivision entrance. "Can you check county records real quick?" The call continued for another 30 seconds while everyone waited. Neighbors whispered quietly among themselves. Lydia remained standing near the road, tapping the edge of her clipboard with visible impatience. Finally, the driver ended the call. But instead of returning immediately to the truck controls, he stayed where he was for a moment, looking at the phone, thinking. Then the phone rang again. He answered quickly. "Yes?" This conversation was shorter, much shorter, but the effect was immediate. The driver's entire posture changed. The uncertainty that had been on his face a minute earlier disappeared completely. He straightened his shoulders and looked slowly across the property once more. From the barn, to the fence line, to the truck. Then he ended the call. For a moment, the entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The driver walked calmly back toward the center of the driveway where Lydia waited. Her expression still carried the same confident expectation. Like she believed the next step would be simple. Hook the truck. Load it. Drive away. The driver stopped a few feet in front of her, and then he spoke. Quietly. but clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a problem." The words hung in the morning air. Lydia frowned slightly. "What kind of problem?" The driver glanced once more at the pickup truck, then at the property marker near the road, then back at Lydia Hastings. And the expression on his face made it clear that whatever answer he was about to give was not the one she expected. The tow driver stood there for a moment, looking from Lydia to the truck, and then back toward the fence line near the road. The quiet that settled over the driveway felt heavy, like the entire neighborhood was waiting for something to break. Lydia shifted slightly, clearly annoyed by the delay. "Well?" she said sharply. "What's the issue?" The driver kept his voice calm, almost careful. "The issue," he said, "is that this property isn't inside the Pine Hollow Estates HOA." A murmur spread across the neighbors standing along the road. Lydia blinked once, then let out a short laugh that sounded forced. "That's incorrect," she said quickly. "The vehicle is visible from the community entrance road, which gives the HOA authority to enforce." The driver raised a hand slightly, stopping her. "Ma'am, I just confirmed the county property records with my dispatcher," he said. "This land is registered under an agricultural easement." He gestured toward the barn and the pasture stretching behind it. "That means the homeowners association doesn't have jurisdiction here." The air felt suddenly colder. Several neighbors looked at one another, whispering under their breath. Lydia's expression tightened, but she wasn't ready to back down yet. "That truck has been sitting there for months," she snapped. "It's abandoned property affecting neighborhood values." The driver shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am," he said. He tapped the hood of the pickup lightly. "According to county code, this vehicle qualifies as agricultural equipment because it's being used on registered farmland." For a second, Lydia didn't say anything, but the driver continued. "And if I remove agricultural equipment from private farmland without the owner's consent," he said evenly, "that's not a tow." He looked directly at her. "That's illegal seizure of property." The words landed like a stone in still water. The neighbors who had gathered along the road grew noticeably quieter. Carl shifted his weight beside the fence and muttered something under his breath that made the woman next to him nod. Lydia's grip tightened on her clipboard. "You were hired to perform a service," she said, her voice colder now. "And the HOA authorized that service." The driver didn't argue, but he didn't move toward the truck either. Instead, he glanced down the road toward the subdivision entrance. Right at the moment, a new sound echoed through the morning air. The low hum of another engine. A white county patrol SUV turned slowly onto the road and rolled toward the driveway, the sunlight reflecting off the windshield. The vehicle stopped near the gate. The driver's door opened. Deputy Marcus Hale stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the tan county sheriff's uniform with a dark green duty belt around his waist. His calm expression suggested he already understood exactly what kind of situation he was walking into. The neighbors parted slightly as he approached the group. "Morning," he said casually. His eyes moved once across the driveway before settling briefly on Lydia. Then he turned toward the tow driver. "You the one who called this in?" The driver nodded. "Yes, sir. Dispatcher contacted county records and suggested we verify jurisdiction." Deputy Hale gave a small approving nod. Then he walked over to the fence post near the road where the county property marker sat half buried in the dirt. He crouched down for a moment, brushing away loose gravel until the metal marker became clearly visible. The small stamped numbers on its surface glinted in the sunlight. Hale stood up and looked toward Lydia. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "this marker shows the official boundary of Pine Hollow Estates." He pointed toward the subdivision behind her. "Your HOA jurisdiction ends right there." Then he turned and gestured toward my barn. "This property belongs to Mr. Mercer and falls under county agricultural zoning." The words carried clearly across the gathered neighbors. Lydia's confident posture had vanished completely now. "But the truck is visible from our road," she insisted weakly. Deputy Hale nodded slightly. "That may be," he said. "But visibility doesn't grant legal authority." The statement landed hard. Several residents exchanged looks. One man shook his head slowly. Another woman whispered something that made two others glance at Lydia with raised eyebrows. The shift in the crowd's mood was unmistakable. For the first time since this started, the people who had watched quietly from the sidelines were beginning to realize what had really been happening. Lydia Hastings hadn't been enforcing rules, she had been inventing them. Deputy Hale folded his arms calmly. "I'd strongly advise against attempting to tow any vehicle from this property," he said. Doing so could create legal issues for everyone involved. The message was clear, very clear. The tow driver didn't hesitate. He walked straight back to the flatbed controls and raised the steel ramp with a loud mechanical whine. The engine revved slightly as he climbed into the cab. Within seconds, the truck began rolling slowly back toward the road. As it passed Lydia, the driver leaned out of the window briefly. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, "but I'm not risking my license for this job." Then the truck turned around and drove away down the road, leaving nothing behind but the fading rumble of the diesel engine. The driveway fell quiet again. And for the first time that morning, Lydia Hastings stood there with no authority left at all. After the tow truck disappeared down the road, the driveway slowly returned to the quiet it had always known. But the story didn't end there. Over the next few days, word about what had happened spread through Pine Hollow Estates faster than any HOA email ever could. People talked about it in driveways, on evening walks, and during the next HOA meeting that suddenly became much more crowded than usual. The security camera footage of the tow truck turning around also made its way through the neighborhood. A few residents had recorded the entire scene on their phones as well, including the moment Deputy Hale pointed out the property boundary marker. Once people saw the full picture, the mood inside the subdivision changed quickly. Several residents began asking questions Lydia Hastings couldn't answer. At the following HOA meeting, more than half the neighborhood showed up. According to Carl, the room that usually held quiet, routine discussions turned into something very different that night. Residents wanted to know why the HOA had been issuing fines outside its jurisdiction. They wanted to know who approved the towing order. And most of all, they wanted to know why Lydia had been so certain she had authority over land that clearly wasn't part of Pine Hollow Estates. Within 2 weeks, the board voted to remove Lydia as HOA president. Officially, the explanation was administrative overreach. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. She had pushed her authority too far, and the entire neighborhood had seen it happen in real time. After Lydia stepped down, the HOA quietly began reviewing its enforcement policies. A few of the board members even contacted county offices to make sure property boundaries were clearly documented before issuing future violations. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly the tension that had been building around the farm began to fade. One afternoon, Carl stopped by the fence again, this time with a grin instead of a warning. "You know that truck of yours is basically famous now, right?" he said. "Famous?" I asked. He laughed. "People still talk about that morning. Half the neighborhood thought Lydia was about to haul it away like some kind of victory parade." I glanced toward the pickup sitting beside the barn where it had always been. The old truck hadn't moved an inch during the entire ordeal. And it wasn't going anywhere now. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected started happening. Neighbors who had stayed quiet during the conflict began stopping by the farm to talk. A few apologized for not speaking up sooner. Others admitted they had received similar violation letters in the past, but had simply paid the fines to avoid trouble. Now they understood what had really been happening. Sometimes when I drive the truck down the road toward town, people wave or laugh as I pass the subdivision entrance. Not in a mocking way. More like they're remembering the same story. Because around Pine Hollow Estates, everyone now remembers the morning the HOA tried to tow the wrong truck. And the phone call that stopped it. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Fence Line Files. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?